Hi there, welcome back to the playlist, or welcome to the playlist if you're just joining. In this section, we're going to be looking at how to apply for jobs, the recruitment process, applications, CVs, all the things that would go into a successful application. Now, as I've said throughout this playlist, we have specific playlists for each individual section that go into these topics in a lot more detail. However, this will act as a bit of an introduction and give you an idea of what you should be aiming for. And we'll start with this. This is what the recruitment process in the UK looks like. You'll start with some form of application online, whether it's an application form, a supporting statement, or a CV, which will then go on to some kind of interview, whether it's a video interview, a telephone interview, and we go over interview preparation in a separate playlist. So if that's something you're concerned about, have a look at that. Then we usually, certainly in graduate roles, go to an assessment centre, which will comprise an interview, some form of presentation, maybe a task, a group task or an individual one, and a full interview. And depending on the size of the employer, it might just be a one-to-one interview and they might not have the assessment centre. And then you're recruited. Now, it's important to say, not every employer will use all of this. They might use one bit or maybe some of it and not all of it. This is just to prepare you. This is what you could come up against. And what we're going to do in this section is look particularly at CVs and the application itself. We'll be covering interviews, like I said, in a separate playlist. So if that's something you're interested in, have a look at that. Though we do talk in the next section about articulating your skills at interview in a little bit of detail. So if we start with CVs, there are a few reasons that you need one in the UK, even still in 2024. For most jobs, especially with what we call SMEs, small to medium-sized businesses, it's required to apply. And even the bigger organisations that might have an application portal or an application form, they usually still require a CV in addition. Manchester University, as an example, still requires a CV with their application form. If you're going to be using recruitment agencies, whether they're specialist or otherwise, they almost exclusively operate on the basis of CVs. And if you're going to be going to graduate fairs and events and potentially meeting employers and approaching them speculatively, which is where you might not know if there is a role available, you are definitely going to need to go armed with a copy of your CV to let them know who you are. Now, we could go into some detail in the other playlists about how to write a good CV, but in terms of sort of general principles, there are a few things you need to bear in mind. First of all, a CV needs to be targeted. It needs to be focused on, at the very least, a specific sector and industry, if not, and this would be the best case, a specific role. What you have to do throughout is show impact. You want to be as positive and assertive in your language as possible. We want to avoid things like responsible for and involved with, and be a bit more positive in your language, a bit more specific, and avoid cliches. Everybody is hardworking. Everybody is expected to be ambitious. You are not going to get any points for throwing in stuff that everyone else says. So you need to be a little bit more intentional in your language. You also need to keep it to an absolute maximum of 2 pages. That is the hard limit in the UK. There are some firms, particularly American ones, and American Finance as an example, that will require a 1-page CV. They make that clear in the application process. But in the UK, 2 pages is what we're aiming for. And finally, it is really common for people to undersell their experience. It's very easy to sit there and think, well, I don't have work experience to talk about, or my work experience is from another country, it's not necessarily relevant. I promise you that is not the case. You can talk about anything in a CV as long as it is relevant to the kind of role that you are going for, and there are ways to make anything relevant. The very fact that you are at university give you things to talk about, so please don't feel like you don't have that. Now, on screen we have an example CV that the university uses. This is not the only way to write a CV, but it demonstrates a few of the key rules. We start with your contact details, and all we really need here is name, email and contact number. You can put your address if you want, but you do not need it, and it can take up space. Then we have a personal profile. You do not need to write a personal profile, but if you do, it needs to be focused. It needs to be specific to the kind of job you are applying for. Then we have your education, and this demonstrates a key criteria for a CV. The further back in time you go, the less detail you give. So here we start with what you're currently studying, where, dates, overall subject, a little bit about your key modules, then your A-levels or whatever your equivalent would be, subjects, grades, location, dates, and then your GCSEs or whatever your equivalent might be, and a grade range, and however many you have, and dates and location. We do not need more than that, and your education is very much a starting point. It's everything else, everything on top of that, which is going to really put you over the edge as opposed to other candidates. After that, we have your work experience. This goes in reverse chronological order, which means most recent first. And what we've done, which is something that you can do that really adds to your CV, is split your experience into relevant work experience. So you highlight it, and then on the next page, we have everything else. So on page 2, you'd have your other work experience, potentially voluntary experience, extracurriculars, positions of responsibility. What you are trying to do here is making sure that the most relevant, most recent stuff is on the first page. That's really important. When you are writing a CV, you have to imagine the person you're writing it for doesn't have a lot of time, doesn't necessarily have a lot of bandwidth. So we're having to get the most relevant, most specific stuff to the kind of job you're going for on the first page. It needs to be the things they read most. After that, then the other stuff can come later. Finally, we finish with references available on request. In the UK, you do not need detailed references, detailed people for them to contact. The reason is they'll only get in contact with your references once they've decided to give you the job, after which your CV isn't really relevant. So this is all we need. That's all I'm going to say on CVs in this playlist. As I said, there is another playlist devoted to CVs, and we have our CV pathway on Career Connect, the QR code for which is on the screen now. So if that's something that you want more detail on, I would really encourage you to use both of those resources and potentially come and see us, where we can have a chat about what your CV should look like and review what you already have. When you're writing your CV or application form, which we'll move on to in a second, you've got to put yourself in the mind of the employer or the recruiter. What they are doing is looking for a very specific set of skills. They'll take these directly from a job description and a person specification, so it's not that difficult to figure out what they want. And what they will do, imagine that they have, let's say, 50 people to decide who gets an interview. They'll use something like this that I have on screen. This is a selection grid. What they'll do, they'll have the key skills they've asked for along the top, the names of everyone that has applied on the left-hand side, as you can see, and then for each of these skills, they will actually give you a score. I talk about it as if it's a game. This is the board you're playing on, these are the rules. The goal of the game is to get the highest score. Now I've used 1 to 4 here, it might be 1 to 5, 1 to 10. Doesn't really matter, because at the end of this process, these scores get added up, and the highest scores are the ones that get invited to interview. That's the goal. Now, what you need to do when you are writing your CV or writing your application, cover letter, whatever it is, go through it and be critical. What scores are you getting for each of the skills they are asking for? This is definitely the hardest part of the process. Something like a quarter of all applications go through to the next stage, which is hard numbers. However, this is something you can practice, something you can get advice on, something you can get better at. And if you do get better at it, then put it another way, you get rid of most of your competition in the first go. So think of it a bit like an opportunity. Now, like I said, you can get that list of skills that you can score yourself against directly from the job description and the person specification. Now, be wary of these two documents and how they are different. They sound similar, and they are in some respects, but they do different things. Now, the job description does what it says. It describes the job. It allows you to figure out, do I actually want to do this job? And allows for what's called self-selection. It allows basically for you to decide, can I do this job? Do I want to do it? It is useful, but for an application, for a CV, there are some other things that we need. And those can be found in the person specification. This is your cheat sheet. It describes the ideal candidate and will cover all of the skills, the knowledge, the experience, everything that they want to interview somebody. So this is what you will be looking for. This is essentially what will be translated into that selection grid. It will be where they will pick out the skills for you to be scored against. So this is what you need. And as you can see here, the two documents look quite different. On the left, we've got the job description, does what it says, describes the role. On the right, each of those bullet points is one skill or experience that they are going to be scoring. So you, in your CVs, in your applications, need to have those in mind and write towards those. Can be a bit of a challenge, and like I say, we do have a playlist entirely devoted to applications, how to write them, how to demonstrate your skills effectively. So if that is something you are interested in, and that is something that you want a little bit more advice on, have a look at that playlist. All of which brings me to the end of this part of the playlist. Coming up, we will be looking at how to articulate your skills, how to talk about your skills and experience in a way that will maximize your score in this process. So definitely have a look at that. As always, if you can like and subscribe, help us grow the channel and reach more students, that would be really very much appreciated. And I will see you in the next video.